You should also be telling the employees there'll be no retaliation. Please bring all of your concerns forward. You don't want them to be scared to bring a concern forward, because then you're going to hear about them too late.
Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vinoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. OSHA, Workplace Violence Prevention. California just passed a new law this week. We want to unpack it for everybody. It takes effect July 1st. So California's OSHA, it's Workplace Violence Prevention. We're going to unpack, who has to comply, what the law means, what kind of records you have to keep. There's a lot of specifics, and these are new things for all businesses in California. So got the perfect guest to unpack this. If you're a regular watcher of the show, you know who Mary is. She's a SHRM certified professional. For the last 8 years, she's been an adjunct professor at the New York Institute of Technology. She was the director of HR consulting for a 58-year-old HR consulting firm in New York. And she is our very own vice president of HR compliance at Assure. Welcome back, Mary.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Okay, so if you live in California, a lot of businesses, you've been watching the news, you know this is coming. But this thing is finally done. It's law. Governor Newsom just signed this thing this week. What does this mean for businesses in California?
So it's actually not too far out of what they've had to do in the past. So in the past, they had an injury illness prevention program. So this plan can be now part of that, or it can be standalone. And they also have given employers a model plan. And we always say to employers, why would you recreate the wheel? Use their model plan. It gives you suggestions. It gives you places where you have to fill in. We've helped lots of clients do this. And I guess the one thing that I would focus on, which we've been seeing with clients that they haven't been focusing on, is the prevention piece, right? This is, saying that it's part of the injury illness prevention, right? Now this is violence prevention. Prevention's in both plans, Mike. So that's what I want employers to focus on. A lot of my employers are focusing on active shooter, and there are pieces in here on what to do. And I do think that's important in the world we live in now. Yeah. But I don't want employers to make that their focus. The prevention piece is what they need to focus on.
Okay. So what makes this, aside from the title, workplace violence, that sounds, I don't know if it sounds broad, but it sounds very different than the things we're used to in HR. The fact that this is being managed by OSHA, California's OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Organization, right? We know the OSHA controls whether you have proper shoring in a ditch, and whether your ladders are correct and you have proper safety harnesses. So it kind of makes sense, workplace safety. But what is it about workplace violence in general? Can you give us maybe a definition of what that means?
Yeah, simply stated, people get hurt. So I think what they're trying to do here, and I think it's important, they're trying to prevent violence from happening, right? So part of the plan asks questions like, in your parking lot, is there lighting, right? So it's violence from outside people and the individuals in your organization. Yeah. But OSHA oversees safety and the health of your employees. So this would fall under it. And we're going through this with so many employers. And one employer said, I was very worried about, the people leaving the office late at night when the sun was down. I kind of already did half of this. So
Yeah.
where it might seem kind of out of the realm of what we should be doing as an employer, it really is a good practice,
Yeah. Yeah.
for employers to do. So I was really happy to hear from a couple clients that they had already put some extra lights in the parking lot. They make a policy that two people walk out to the cars, nobody closes the building alone. I was really happy to hear all of that. And that's the guidance that you'll see out of the prevention plan.
Okay. So that makes me feel better already that this is, on one hand, I worry for employers as a fellow entrepreneur. I worry for employers. The administrative burden becomes so overbearing at times. But if this is one of those things that, good common sense and people are probably kind of sort of doing anyway, that certainly sounds like the administrative burden is going to be more of reporting, record keeping, and probably just documenting things people already do to make sure we understand what it is that they have to do. Unpack, put this into buckets for us. What does this law mean for businesses? Who must comply? Are small businesses exempt? What are the things that they have proactively have to do, etc.?
So there's very few exemptions. If you and I had an organization and everybody worked remote, we will probably be exempt.
Okay.
But I have not spoken to any of our clients that have been exempt.
Okay.
So I think it's a good practice. So, and we'll unpack each of these, but there's the written plan,
Okay.
and then there's a whole piece where we have to make sure staff can comment on the plan and help us write it. There's training requirements. So much like the anti-harassment training that our California employers have to do. And there's a violent incident log. So we should all be used to, as an employer, or most employers, filling out your OSHA logs. This is in addition to the other OSHA logs for injuries. This is for a violent incident, whether somebody was hurt or not.
Okay.
And the fifth thing is there's a record keeping requirement, as there is for every HR, regulation, out there. There's always a record keeping, and that's to protect the company too if you get audited.
Yeah. Right. So some of the things in the back half of that list. So violence, incident log. I mean, that sounds like just having a good escalation process. You and I have done shows on that topic before for like anti-harassment complaints and whatnot. Record keeping, that sounds like an obvious one. I'm curious that the first thing you said was having a written plan. That sounds like an obvious requirement. I was very intrigued by number two that you said about a comment period. When I think about laws, I think legislative bodies, uh, uh, you know, deliberating and saying, okay, here, or an executive branch, here's the new law, and then they open it to a comment period to change the law. Is that to suggest that employers are going to be able to make up their own workplace violence plans and their employees get to have input? Take me through that.
I think it's more giving suggestions, right? So if the employer has a huge warehouse, they may be missing one area of the warehouse that one of the employees makes a suggestion and says, hey, this part of the warehouse, we get a lot of deliveries. There's a lot of outside people, for example, coming into that area. We could use extra lighting, or we could use a lock on that door so the vendors can't walk right in whenever they want, or somebody off the street. So I actually think it's helpful. Listen, anytime we roll out any kind of policy, Mike, we want employees to be engaged in it. And if they feel like they can, give us suggestions to make that policy better, I think that you're going to engage them better in the training, and adhering to the policy. So I actually think it's good. Any employer, of more than 10 employees should have some safety policy, right? So we write handbooks all the time.
Yeah.
This is definitely going a step, couple steps beyond that, but everybody should have a safety policy. And if I'd say you're more than 20 employees, you should have somebody in charge of that safety policy. A lot of times it's human resources. A lot of times it's the operations manager, whomever it is, somebody should be in charge. So for this policy, they're forcing Mike is in charge of it. If you have comments, please go to Mike. Mike is reviewing those suggestions, adding them to the policy, or saying, that's something that would be too costly, whatever the reason is
Yeah.
that it can't close. But I kind of like that they have the comment period because I think it's going to, increase the engagement from the staff.
So are there, stepping back before comment period, so there has to be a plan. And by the way, Cal OSHA has put out a pretty good document. It's a 3-page summary. Certainly the law has more detail. We're going to include the link to this PDF in the show notes, so everyone will have it. Are there requirements of what the plan must contain or cannot contain?
Yeah, so there is that a model policy, and literally when
Okay.
we go through it with clients, we just help them answer the questions. Some things that, some are very simple. How many exits do you have? How many entrants? Are they locked? Are they not locked? The obvious things.
Yeah.
And then there's things that are maybe take a little thought process, like, well, what have you done if somebody had a violent act, right? And that's where the HR hack comes in, right? Do you put them on a warning notice? Is it immediate termination? Do we consider that gross misconduct if you hit somebody at work? I would say yes, spoiler alert. But there is some areas of the model plan that take some thought process. That's where you want some guidance. And then there's other areas where it's literally fill in the blank, and it's really well done. They actually give suggestions.
Okay. Okay. So there's a model template to follow. They provide questions to help ask and refine this. And then ultimately you publish your workplace violence prevention plan. Is that right?
Correct. Perfect.
And this might be a stupid way to ask the question, but we're like, roughly how big and comprehensive is this thing? Does it turn out to be, 500 words, one sheet of paper? Is it a 10-page or 20-page essay? What is the
It,
art?
it's a 10 to 20 page. This is the process that we go through. This is where you go if there was violence. This is how you report it. These are some suggestions on what would happen. Here's the person you go to if you recognize or hear some. We've had, before this plan came into existence, we've had lots of employee relations issues. I saw Joe was bringing his gun to work. I noticed that so and so was really speaking harshly to another person and threatening them.
Yeah.
So it may, for, some really smaller companies or family run where this has never been an issue, this might be like, wow, this seems a little extreme. But it's also talking about, outside people, right? We hear it on the news all the time, Mike, unfortunately, right? The you know the couple who has a domestic violence issue, and the one or the other of the partners comes into work and,
Right.
you know con- conducts an act of violence. I mean, I don't it happens all the time. It's, I think, prudent to have a plan here that helps prevent it, helps employees feel safer at work.
So, Mary, is it safe to say when you say 10 to 20 pages, this is a meaty thing. It's not a small thing, but it's your estimation that the state of California, the OSHA department has put together a decent model and the questions to ask that should make this thing manifest itself pretty straightforward. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's definitely manageable. It's definitely manageable, and I'll tell our listeners some good news amongst this. Cal OSHA has come up very publicly and said we do not have the auditors to go door to door to audit this. Doesn't mean we won't. And if somebody in the workplace, calls us and says, "Hey, I know there's supposed to be a violence protection plan. My organization doesn't have it. I don't feel safe at work." You're getting audited. And if there was a violent act at your place of business, you're going to get audited. Again, I compare it to the anti harassment.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of audits on whether you're doing it, but if you have a claim and you haven't done that training, your
Yeah.
fines quadruple themselves. And this is the same exact situation.
So that makes sense. So the written plan, and I wrote down, so the 5 buckets you gave me: written plan, comment period, training, an incident log, and then record keeping. So the written plan, don't underestimate it. It's not a small thing. It's comprehensive, 10 to 20 pages, but there's also a template that's kind of provided, a model that Caloshu's provided,
Fill in the blank.
and fill in the bank questions to help you along the way. So take it serious. It's comprehensive. Don't be also too intimidated by it, right?
Perfect.
How about this comment period? And maybe I'm gonna go to waters I don't like to go in this call. Depending where you sit politically, the word violence has taken on very different meanings. Um, so there are some things that all of us clearly agree. Whether you lean left, you lean right, no matter how extreme is violence. Hands-on people, hitting people, guns. I mean, there are clear things. There's also our words violence, right? Does the law How prescriptive does the law get around definition of what violence is and isn't? Because I'll just say it. I've said this many times. We do our very best on this show not to be political. We just want to share the best information we can, legal opinion, to help small businesses stay compliant and grow. Period. So I don't care what people's opinions are, but I care very much what Cal OSHA's position on this is, so that employers can comply.
Well, I think there's real and perceived danger, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can give you an example of a California client we had that terminated somebody, and we've all heard stories like this. It was well known that he had guns and lots of them because he talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
And he was terminated via phone because he worked remotely, and he said, "I'm on my way over." So that to me, some people may think that's perceived. I instructed the employer to be safe and to call the police.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luckily nothing happened, but the plan, like I said, is pretty simple. You fill in the blank.
Okay.
But I just think we're trying to prevent any incidents. And yes, it's internal, but it's also, external. There's a strange person sitting in their car for the past 3 hours in our parking lot, right? So it's clients, it's vendors, it's
Yeah.
strangers, it's family members of employees, and it's employees. So there's a lot of people coming and going in a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
Forget
Right.
about the restaurants and the retail situation. You've got, you know, could be hundreds of people coming through the door every day. But even in an office, in our office, people are coming and going, right? The mailman's coming every day, the UPS
Yeah.
guy.
Right.
So, we want to make sure we're keeping
Food delivery. I mean, there's
yes.
non-employees that. Yeah. Right.
So you want everybody to be safe. Um, and so it's perceived, and there'll be questions for that, and then there's real violence. Somebody actually hits somebody's actually waving a gun, real extreme, pushing, hitting, threatening words, like you said. So they will define it in the plan. They do, I think, an excellent job. Very often you get regulations come out and we're like, we don't have enough information. This is pretty good. There's always going to be questions
Yeah.
that we can't answer.
I and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just know for a fact the title of this workforce violence prevention, it's gonna trigger some folks. That's why I wanted to dwell in this area for a second. I think I think you hit it hard. The key here is prevention. So it's having policies that prevent situations from escalating. This is no, I don't think this anywhere nearly broaches anything. Some freedom of speech. You can't say scream fire in a crowded theater, right? But if people feel threatened, this isn't about their feelings. This is what is your policy and procedure when people do feel threatened, whether that's somebody brandishing a gun, which is obvious violence, or you just feel threatened. So we can be in the area of feelings, which aren't quite as black and white, but the law says you must have a plan to deal with these things when they come up. Am I saying it right?
Yes, yes. And I think that's fair, right? I think employees, they may know where to go to ask about their benefits. And hopefully in California, their policy is pretty clear on anti-harassment. So if you feel like you're being discriminated against, you know who to go to. Who do I go to if I feel threatened? If I feel like harm may come to me,
Yeah.
this is what's going to provide that information to employees.
Yeah, right, right. Very good. All right. What can you tell us now about the comment period? Like what's inbounds, what's out of bounds, how long of a period does there have to be? Does
It's not as much a comment period, but employees must be told that they can give feedback on the policy and suggestions. So it would be posting the policy, telling them that they can comment, ask questions, make suggestions, make sure it's clear where they can find the policy. So you can make hard copies. I don't think many individuals are doing that. You can put it on the intranet. You can do both. So make sure that it's available for them to see. And then our next bucket, of course, is the training portion. You're going to go through your entire plan and you are going to ask again, Mike, and you're going to say, okay, everybody, I just explained our plan to you. What questions, comments, and suggestions do you have? And
yeah,
if you don't want to say them now, you'll go to, and there'll be a designated, person or two that they can go to, a safety manager.
yeah,
Who you normally at most organizations has a second job, right? So a lot of times it's one of the foremen or the COO or the HR manager, right? You go to that individual, make sure the employees know who to go to make those suggestions, questions, comments.
yeah. Okay, great. Um, I'm assuming one day, probably won't take that long. That's probably where the legal tests will come is, and I don't know if you have any insight into this or not, of how much of the employee feedback do you need to give. On face value, it just sounds smart. It's like, hey, here's the plan. Have we missed anything? And I loved your use case earlier. Hey, we got that one storage building out back. It's really dark. It'd be great if we could have some lights on there, or after X o'clock, nobody goes out there by themselves. Really, really practical, good stuff. If you open this up to employees to give their opinions, you're going to get some ideas that probably aren't appropriate to be in a plan like this. Where to draw the cutoff there? I'd be curious for your coaching. I'm just going to assume this will be legally tested of what you can and can't and should or shouldn't include. But what would be your guidance for an employer who gets suggestions that they would respectfully decline? They're not harassing that employee. They're not discriminating against that employee, but they think it's inappropriate for a plan. How should you handle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we do a lot of employee surveys and ask for feedback from employees for the employers we support. And I always say to the employers, first of all, You have to make sure that you want to hear the information. Here we don't have the option, right, Mike?
Right.
But you have to be transparent. You can't have Mike Vinoy give a suggestion and let it, evaporate into the ether and
Right.
not get back to Mike and say, we gave it careful consideration, and putting a deadbolt and 5 extra locks on that particular door did not make sense. There's also safety issues, in escaping, right? So you
Yeah.
have to get back to that person,
Yeah.
um, and let them know why you didn't utilize their suggestion. And that comes up a lot in work. I think, a
Yeah.
lot of companies have the good old that used to have the suggestion box. Hopefully everybody has an online suggestion box. But, that is that typical. You have to finesse that conversation, but you should be transparent because they deserve to hear, why or why not
Yeah.
their suggestion was used.
And it's easy to say yes to people. It's harder to say no, but that
Agreed.
those are grown up conversations that you're just going to have, right? Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. So you got a written plan. You provide opportunity for comments from the employees. Um, Now you have to train on this. Are there specifics around the training? Um,
Yeah, this is
yeah.
thanks for asking. This is the one area that's a little gray. And again, I'm gonna and liken it to the anti-harassment training
Okay.
in California, because I can remember when it first came out, and there was a lot of interpretation that the training had to be done in person. So right now there is a lot of interpretation that this should be done in person, so that you can go, the exits are over there, right? It's a physical thing. Well, what about the organization? And we have lots of them that have 5, 10, 20, 50 locations, right? So you're going to do the training in 50 locations. So, I've spoken to, attorneys and some Cal OSHA experts. I do think that you're going to be able to do this live virtual. I don't know that e-training will work for this right now. So this is so new. Mike, it's due, in 30 days, or,
Yeah.
July 1st.
July 1st.
Um,
Right.
so I'm always, I'm going to be conservative when I'm giving advice to our clients. And I'm going to say that I think live virtual is going to be your best. Number one, getting the comments from the employees. What are your questions? Could you do e-training and then at the end have them acknowledge that they saw the policy, were given the vehicle to make comments and ask questions? You can do that, right? The instructions can't be that explicit. Um, but again, for my money, I think it's safest. Number one, I do it in person. And you're explaining your plan. Number two, the second best would be live virtual, which would just be like what you and I are doing, so that
Yeah.
employees can give us real time comments. And I think my last option would be uh, through an e-training vehicle. But because it has to be interactive, they have to make those comments and be able to ask questions. You would have to add some interactive questions, as well as an acknowledgement, as well as some information on how they can make 2 questions,
And
etc.
so while the governor has already indicated, hey, we don't have the resources to go inspect all this and audit every firm, I feel like this is an easy one to not only comply but go a little bit above and beyond. I mean, if you're going to train, how much extra effort is there to just get some form of acknowledgement? The acknowledgement could be, I'm walking around with my phone. Hey, did you just take the test? I mean, when I get on an airplane with American Airlines, I got to give them a verbal yes when they explain the exit row instructions, right? So
Right.
whether it's you videotape it, which is maybe a little awkward, they sign something, they send an email. There's a million ways to attest to this. Fair to say that the more you can document, just keep it simple, but the more you can document, the better, right?
Right. I mean, that's the way I feel. The training will requirement will be even a little bit more onerous than the anti-harassment because it's going to be every year. And there's also a mandate that if there was a violent act or if something came to light that was significant and you changed or modified the plan, there should be new training on that item.
Well, it makes sense.
It does.
You're
It does.
unsuccessful preventing this type of an event. Update the policy and train on that type of event, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. Anything? So you talked about the different methods that you can train. Ideally, face to face, people take a test at the end and prove that they learned it, and then attest to it, and you capture the whole thing on video. That's the dream sequence.
Right.
But beyond that, we could do this virtually as long as you have a reasonable way to verify that the training happened and people have attested that they've taken that training. You're on fairly solid ground. Let's move on to something happens. And maybe it's not even something happens. I suspect you're going to tell me this looks an awful lot like having a good anti-harassment reporting policy, where you have it's what you call the violence incident log. Maybe just explain what that means.
Yeah, and this log is also going to come out of California OSHA, so they are making it as easy as they can.
Okay.
You have to maintain a log of all the incidents of workplace violence, even if there was no injury, which I had said earlier. And it should include a lot of information. What it shouldn't include, but you'll have to keep a separate record, is you're going to redact the names of individuals that were involved. They give you an option of 4 different types of workplace violence, escalating. And, again, it's a fill in the blank. It's the date, it's the time, it's the location, it's, who committed the violence. So that would be outside vendor, employee. What are the circumstances? So very similar to your 300 log that you would keep as an employer for OSHA, but
Okay.
this is going to be more specific to violence. Who completed it, and and I would suspect that this is what they're going to look at, right? So if you only do one part of this, um, and you don't do the other, it's probably not going to look good. Because if you only do the incident log and you have some instances of violence, and you don't have a plan to prevent it, that's not going to look good.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
be careful.
So California employers are used to an OSHA log. This is going to be similar. So fair to say, I guess maybe super tactical. Is it a format they must follow in creating their own log, or is there literally like a coupon book or like a form that is an OSHA form that they would complete?
There's a form that
Yeah.
they complete, and look, usually an agency like this will say you can do your own plan or follow ours. Our advice is always just use theirs. It's just so much easier, streamlined. It's going to meet the requirements. I don't know why you'd spend the extra time doing it. Maybe there's some instances, but I honestly, we don't have employers that I would suggest doing something outside of this violence incident log.
I mean, even if you had great intentions of just doing something above and beyond to make it just awesome, if there ever was an enforcement issue, they'll understand oh, row 3, column 4, they just know where to look for stuff. They're going to be more
Right.
comfortable. I would assume it would be to your benefit to use their forms just to make compliance easier and make it more likely for them to deem you as compliant.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So the violence incident log, pretty straightforward. You're going to be using OSHA's forms for that. Maybe the last topic on record keeping, Mary. So what are the record keeping requirements?
Yeah. So there are some government forms, right, that you would um, send someplace to show that you did it, much like an EEO-1 report, right? But this, it stays within the workplace, right? So you're not sending certificates of training anywhere. You're not sending your policy anywhere. So you need to keep good record keeping so that if you do get audited, number one, if you do get any kind of legal action against you for this violence that occurred, right? And I just want to go back to some of the definition. Don't forget, this is going to include sexual assault, may fall under a violent act. It's really popular for people to bring dogs into work. And it is, we have dealt with situations where, and I'm a dog lover, so I think it's, fine, but we've had instances where the dogs that came into work have bit, people in the workplace.
Yeah.
So it would, it would involve all of the above. Um, so the plan has to be kept in writing and always accessible to employees. That's why you could post it on a bulletin board. We've done things like you put it on a ring and you laminate it so they can always look at it, because for a factory, the employees aren't using computers,
Yeah.
and put it on the internet, right? So you always need it available. And we're going to keep each of the plans and the logs that we had for 5 years. That's important because a lot of HR things I feel are 1 or 7. So 5 years kind of threw me off a little bit. The training records must be created and maintained for a minimum of 1 year. So that would be your certificate of training. Um, the and yeah, the logs I had said 5 years, and don't forget that we're not just going to take things for granted. Somebody said so and so threatened me, and we're going to create an incident log. We're going to investigate. And so employers need to realize for all of these, there's going to be a non retaliation clause, meaning if Mike raises his hand and says, Mary's my boss and I feel threatened by her, this is what she said, we do the investigation. Whether or not we find that Mary was, in fact, um, threatening to Mike, Mary still can't retaliate against Mike. So whether I was guilty or not of threatening Mike, I still can't retaliate against him for making the claim. So that to me says, look, this doesn't mandate that managers have separate training than employees, but I always recommend that.
Yeah. It's number one on OSHA's list, right?
Yes.
The number one item on the plan, prohibiting employee retaliation.
Yes. So I think it's important for managers to have separate training. Look, you should also be telling the employees there'll be no retaliation. Please bring all of your concerns forward. You don't want them to be scared to bring a concern forward because then you're going to hear about them too late.
Right.
So you do make that part of your training for everybody. But I just like to be uber conscious. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll do the training for everybody together. Employees, questions? No? Okay. Managers, please stay. And then we reiterate some of the points, like no retaliation. If they bring a concern to you, it goes to the safety manager, HR, CEO. You give more than one person that they can go to.
Mary, is it possible? Uh, I mean, you and I know very well. I mean, you're in the New York area. You're a New York resident, New York City area. Um, the laws always start in the coasts and then slowly move to the middle. It's just generally how this goes. Whether it's music, fashion, art, or
Yeah.
HR laws. That's how it generally happens. Um, Is it? And so California is already, they have to do mandated anti-harassment training, sexual harassment training. Is it possible for employers to combine these policies, combine the training? I hear a lot of on one hand, I hear a lot of you say a lot of things that are specific OSHA forms, like an audit log, like an incident log on an OSHA form. That feels very OSHA specific. But I also know that you and I have done shows talking about having a formal written anti-harassment policy and an escalation process that's defined, including uh, no retaliation to employees. So on one hand, it feels like there's a lot of overlap, but also some very specific differences. How much could employers combine these things and say, I'm going to just do one training and that I cover both these things, or would you guide to separate training on two separate processes?
I mean, they could certainly do the training back to back. I wouldn't recommend it because they're two separate issues, and I think it would be a long time to pull staff, off the floor. And being an HCM company, I feel responsible enough to say that don't forget, if you mandate training, your non-exempt employees get paid for it, so don't think it's
Sure.
unpaid time, it's paid
Right.
time. So to do a 2-hour training, and they each should be at least an hour
And
long.
you really answered the question when you said back to back, because I was talking about truly commingling the content, the policies, the processes. You're saying they need to be separate. So the guidance here is okay, employer, don't think that you're going to add some paragraphs to your anti-harassment policy and you're going to add a couple bullet points to the training or a couple slides to your training that you're doing for anti-harassment. These are two discrete things that must be treated separately, right?
100%.
Okay.
Very, very different. It's just the process is the same, because in both examples, we want people to come forward. So we need to make them feel as though they're protected and won't be retaliated against, because let's face it, quite often when it comes to anti-harassment, it is the manager doing the harassing. So you can imagine an employee thinking, I'm going to lose my job if I complain about my manager. And the anti-violence can be from a coworker that they're physically afraid of, as well as a manager for sure. But it's important to have those situations, retaliation, non-retaliation, but you're going to investigate everything in this type of situation, even if it was employee relations, right? Even
Right.
if it wasn't violence or discrimination, so and so just gave bad customer service. We're going to investigate
Yeah.
100% of the time.
Great. Mary, anything else that you want employers to know about the Cal OSHA Workplace Violence Prevention Law just passed by and signed into law by Governor Newsom?
I just wouldn't be nervous about it. I would just go ahead, open it, look at our link, which is going to explain it, and then pull up the policy and walk through it. It's relatively intuitive. And I think Cal OSHA did a really good job on their website as having guidance and a lot of Q&As for employers to look at. So I wouldn't be nervous. I would just do it. Set aside 2-3 hours and it'll be done. And then you got to schedule the training
Okay, I was going to
as
ask.
soon as
That's my
possible.
final question. 2, 3 hours. So, okay. Mary, very helpful. I think if I can recap the punchline here, California law, enforced by California's OSHA department, agency, I should say. All employers, the only possible exception would be employers who are 100% virtual. There's not a workplace to prevent the violence in. But if you have any employees that report to a workplace, which is essential, almost everybody, you've got to comply. You've got to have a written plan. The OSHA has done a good job putting together a fill in the blank template for you to follow. You've got to allow your employees to comment and possibly augment that plan. You don't have to say yes, but you have to give them the opportunity. And the best advice here is to coach them in the difficult conversations if you choose to say no, so that they feel heard and understand why their suggestion might not make the plan. You've got to train on that plan. You've got to track any incidents in an OSHA provided form to create an incident log, and you got to keep your records for 5 years. And this is completely separate than any other anti-harassment training. This is a discrete law that you must follow. The initial effort, 2 or 3-ish hours, excluding however much time it's going to take to train your employees annually. Did I capture it?
You did a good job. You were doing good listening. It can be, the written plan can be included in that injury illness prevention program that California employers need to do.
Yeah.
And there may be some other exceptions. It would be hard to, list every exception. But I wouldn't assume you're an exempt employer until you spoke with somebody that could give you good advice on it.
Yeah. What should employers do if they have questions, especially if they think they have edge cases, not sure what to do?
I mean, they certainly can ask us, but Cal OSHA has a phone number you can call.
Okay, great.
Again, they did a good job.
Okay, very
rolling
good.
This out.
Mary, thank you for taking us through it. It's more complex, but also probably a lot simpler in some ways than I thought of this when I first saw it. So hopefully you made it simple for all the California employers listening or watching. And to them, if you got value from this conversation, I encourage you to like, comment, and share, and certainly subscribe to Mission to Grow. Mary, as always, enjoy talking to you, and thanks to everybody else for attending today.
Thanks, Mike.
That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit assuresoftware.com. Until next time.